Welcome, everyone. I will reconvene this meeting. The time is now 7 p.m. We will move into our Pledge of Allegiance, which will be led by Vice President Steele, followed by a moment of silence and our land acknowledgement led by Member Hodge. Please stand.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States.
Thank you.
Tempe High School District acknowledges that our community of schools is located on ancestral lands of the Akiman, Pima, and Peeposh Maricopa indigenous people who have inhabited these lands since the time immemorial. With this land acknowledgement, the district formally recognized that the tradition, care, and keeping up of these lands by indigenous people allowed us to be here today.
Thank you, Vice President Steele and Member Hodge. Next, we will move to item D, our report from the acting superintendent, Dr. Wilson.
Thank you, President Montero, Vice President Steele, members of the governing board. I'm excited to bring a couple of recognitions to you. The first is student recognition. The first recognition is an annual recurrence for the district as we welcome teachers and students from our CTE film and television program who have won Emmys. Yes, that's right, Emmys, for their amazing work. We want to recognize Mrs. Karen Crane from McClintock High School, Mr. Ben Forbes from Corona del Sol High School, to help us recognize the 2023 Rocky Mountain Emmy Award-winning students in our district. Each of these programs won 3 Emmys at the award ceremony last month. All student names are on the screen. Emmys were awarded to Tempe Union students in the following categories. In the category of McClintock High School Video Essay Swim Spotlight, High School Photographer Video Announcement Intro, and High School Editor Senior Night for Football. And in the category of Magazine Program, Corona del Sol High School Spring Homeroom Episode, High School Editor Stan Culture, High School Talent News or Sports, Animals I Refuse to Believe Exist. Congratulations to Mrs. Crane and Mr. Forbes. Would you like to come forward and say a few words about your award-winning students? Yes.
Hi, thank you for seeing us. Yeah, I truly honored and blessed. Our students work really, really hard, and we put out about 5 hours worth of content every year. I think this year is actually going to be longer than that. Where kids work just so hard, and I'm so proud of them. And the cool thing is that 2 of the awards at Corona anyway are awarded to juniors. So they're actually going to be able to put that on their college application, that they're actually Emmy award-winning videographers, which is, I think, really awesome. And then, of course, last year's team walked away with the best news magazine program in the Southwest region, which is pretty cool. So that's in 4 states. So, yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Forbes. Next, we have staff recognition. For our staff recognition tonight, we want to highlight Ms. Vanessa Mora, who teaches visual arts at Corona del Sol. Ms. Mora is a brand new teacher with us this year, and she has been selected as this year's recipient of the Outstanding New Professional Art Educator by Arizona Art Education Association, AAEA. This is a tremendous honor, and we are pleased to recognize her tonight. Congratulations, Vanessa. Would you like to come up to the podium and say a few words?
Perfect. I just want to say thank you for letting me be part of this meeting, to be recognized. I actually graduated from Corona in 2016, so I did take art there all 4 years, and I also did my student teaching there as well. So ever since I was in kindergarten, I knew I wanted to do something with art, and then in high school, kind of, having to figure out what I wanted to do in the future, I realized that my passion lied in art education, just because I enjoyed not just creating art, but I loved the conversations of talking about art, helping my peers with like skills and techniques, and I just kind of realized that's what I wanted to do for the future. So yeah, so I feel so happy now that I get to be back at Corona and kind of call that my own space and be able to lead the students in the future. And hopefully my teaching philosophy just kind of lies in, I want every student to gain some kind of appreciation for art, whether it's creating, talking about art or just using the skills of the creative process in other disciplines. So I'm so happy to be part of this district that has been meant to me since I was a student. And I just hope to continue here as long as possible because I just love it. So thank you so much.
Well, Ms. Morrow, we're so excited that you decided to return to Tempe Union and be a teacher with the Aztecs over at Corona, and congratulations to you again. That concludes my report.
Thank you, Dr. Wilson. And just for the record, since we do have public comment tonight, I'm going to pull item F1 above item E1. So we will do public comment now. So this is the time for the public to comment. Members of the governing board may not discuss items that are not on the agenda. Therefore, action taken as a result of public comment will be limited to directing staff to study the matter or scheduling the matter for further consideration and decision at a later date. In accordance with policy BEDH, each speaker will be given 3 minutes to speak. Our first speaker is Benjamin Larrabee.
Howdy, y'all. First of all, in regards to our land acknowledgement, let me first just say this is American land, and as we are all Americans in the room, this is all our land. But the reason I'm here tonight is because of the paper that I received on my front door last week. Story about Tempe Union is right on the front. Right above the headline, how my tax dollars to the tune of $10 million are being used for tree equity, it reads, TU's guidelines for boys in the girls' bathroom. Because apparently, whether he was authorized or not, your general counsel told this reporter that biological boys are allowed to use the women's restroom. Now, if this is something you have not heard or not yet discussed, I do apologize for my next remarks. But if this was a willful act and decision, this is something you have to reverse course on immediately because it is putting all of our students in danger. Stories from around the country are pouring in of the physical and sexual assaults that have taken place because of stories like this, because of policies like this. We all know in Loudoun County, Virginia, where a student was sexually assaulted because a man was allowed into the women's restroom. We all have seen the videos coming out of Portland of a student suffering from gender dysphoria brutally beating another female student. Last week, just up the road in Peoria, another student with a severe brain injury was assaulted by another student suffering from gender dysphoria because he was asked to stop using the women's restroom because he was scaring all of the girls there. Now, just note, before I sound harsh, know this. After affirmation and transition, suicide, self-harm, and depression get worse for people suffering from gender dysphoria. Why? Because when you affirm someone's false mental state, their health will continue to deteriorate, making violent outbursts inevitable. Now, if what I'm saying again sounds harsh, it's because it is. Protecting our children requires embracing hard truths. But before you call me uncompassionate, the most compassionate thing you or I can do, whether you agree with me or not, is putting aside our political differences and agreeing that hard truths must be embraced in order to protect our students. I urge you, and I will work with anybody on this board to do this, to reject this policy and restore common sense to our district. Thank you very much.
Next, we have Kelly Cooper.
Thank you, everybody here. I appreciate you providing this forum for the public to make comment. I was called down here by my heart, and I have a written statement, and I will read that statement, and then I will turn it over to you guys. I think that so far tonight it's been very positive, and I want to congratulate the people that received awards tonight because I think it's well-deserved, and we should do that for our teachers. Following along with the subject line that just happened, my name's Kelly Cooper. I'm here to deliver a message to this and really all school boards across the country. It's that parents matter. I believe that we all know that, but we have to get back to understanding and acting in that manner. I have 2 children, Kennedy and Mason. I own restaurants in this area. My kids both attend schools nearby. I am a very active member in this community, and when I heard that the Tempe Union was allowing for forcing students and parents, I was shocked. When I read that the Tempe Union's general counsel said that schools will have students that can use the bathrooms that match their gender identities, it was put on my heart to come down here and make this statement. Many parents are struggling with the same things today, and many of them don't have the time to come down here and make the statement that I am making today. But instead of focusing on reestablishing excellence in our schools, it seems like the general counsel really is only focused on some of the divisive ideology that is facing us today. And I have to tell you that excellence in schools matter, and my daughter deserves excellence in schools. So truly, if this is a conscious decision, I will agree with him. It's really shame on all of you, and I hope that you will reconsider this decision. Not only is it wrong, it's dangerous and disrespectful for our daughters. It makes students like my daughter wildly uncomfortable, and I have to have that conversation with her at home. And it has a negative impact on their learning environment. The evidence is clear that these policies put our daughters at risk, and you can look at the cases that he just referenced. And I want everybody, truly, I want everybody to live happily. I want them to follow their own direction. But in this environment, one's personal wants do not override the needs, security, and protection of our young girls, and really the majority. The mothers and fathers in this room and around the district will not stand by and do nothing. Each of you know that you're elected officials, and each of you know that parents are generally the majority of the people that pay attention. I believe that there will be repercussions in the next election cycle. Thank you for allowing the forum.
That concludes public comment. Next, we'll move to item E1, Strategic Plan Update. Dr. Wilson.
Thank you, President Montero, Vice President Steele, members of the board. Just tonight, want to give you a quick update with where we are. Just first going into the timeline as we scroll down here to the 4th, we shared that today we would give you an update on the strategic initiatives, mission, vision, core values, and commitments, and then get your feedback. I'll also share a quick update on the Delphi surveys. So as we get into the document of the strategic initiatives, I want to share with you all that on September 18th, the design team met and spent the day together going through the initiatives. 62 people from the design team were invited, and when it was all said and done, I think we ended up getting about half of that. But we spent the day working through this. We reviewed our journey with the strategic plan. We researched various strategic plans with educational institutions, looked at various initiatives, and ultimately, as you see this, and it is all in draft form because it isn't final until it's final, so everything is still in progress, but you see our new vision, mission, and core values, which you approved, the governing board goals for this year, and then as we scroll down, we get into the work that was done on the 18th. So what you'll notice is the strategic initiatives have 4 categories. The first one being academic achievement. The design team broke up into 4 groups and spent time looking at all of the areas and research within those and looking and then determining how is Tempe Union going to define this strategic initiative, along with developing commitments to this initiative. So this was the work for that group. Then our next group, as we go down, is financial responsibility and transparency. And so the group who worked on this came up with how Tempe Union will define this, along with developing commitments. The next category was recruitment and retention of highly qualified staff. This group did the same thing. You'll notice they defined it and then they broke it up with recruitment and then retention. So you see commitments in both of those areas. And then our final strategic initiative, moving into culture and climate. And in this one, defining what that means for Tempe Union along with the commitments. The group worked hard. We put in a full day's work. There was a lot of researching, a lot of just debating and getting clear with what we need and now, or what we wanted within these initiatives. This will continue to take shape as we go through and start developing the committees. So in no way is this a final version, but in this wanting to share where we were with this and get your feedback on this part. And then I'll share about the surveys. Any feedback on this?
Board members, questions or comments for Dr. Wilson? All right, nothing on this part. Thank you.
Thank you. And just a brief update on the Delphi surveys. Those have gone out. With our community, we had 625 responses with those, with staff 277, and with our students 4,906. Now, given the type of survey we gave, this is a good response rate. These are open-ended, thought-provoking questions, so this isn't a quick Likert scale click type of survey, so people have to really think through with things that they're visioning, so it does take time. While we are happy and know that for this type of a survey, this is a good response, we're still seeking to get a higher response rate. So we will have more texts and emails going out to families. So if you receive that from your principals, please complete that because we do want your input and your feedback. This will be used as we continue moving through the process of working through these committees and incorporating that information in as we develop the plan. So that concludes my update on the strategic plan.
Thank you, Dr. Wilson. I appreciate the regular updates on this as we continue to go through this process. Board members, questions or comments? All right, hearing none, then we will move on to our consent agenda. I will make a motion to approve items G1 through G10. Do I have a second?
I second.
Thank you, Member Hodge. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Motion passes 4-0. Next, we move to teaching and learning, item H1, the Horizon ACT data analysis. And we'll turn it over to Dr. Alexic.
Thank you. Good evening, President Montero, Vice President Steele, members of the board, and Dr. Wilson. Thank you for having me here tonight to present on the Fall Horizon practice assessments. So this presentation today is really related to the first two board goals for this current year. So the data that you're going to look at today looks at how students, really provides us some baseline data for how students are doing on the English, reading, ACT, as well as their math performance. So for our ACT district plan for the current year, now that we're done with Q1, you'll see that in our district plan, we started that quarter with looking over the ACT content plans for each of the core and non-core content areas. We looked at some of the things that we've learned from last year and updated some of those plans. We looked at student performance last year on the ACT state level test. We also tried to incorporate as much of the student feedback as we could to alter and make some changes to these ACT plans. I know that one of my favorite comments from a student that the plan was lacking joy. So we tried really hard to make it more joyful and entertaining for them. Another comment that really was a repetitive comment is more practice in class and more frequently. And so we've really tried to update those content plans so that they reflect that. And then the last kind of bullet in that Q1 is gathering some baseline data and administering the practice test to all our 9th through 11th graders. So you'll see that we had completed that from September 5th to the 15th. We've collected that data. So what I'm going to share with you now is the results that we currently have. So just as a reminder, we give the practice test to 9th, 10th, and 11th graders. Our 9th and 10th graders take the pre-ACT. So this pre-ACT assessment is designed to be predictive of the ACT performance, but it's shorter in length, and the cut scores are lower because it is a shorter test. So that top table shows you the length of the test for the 9th and 10th grade practice test, and then the length of that test for the ACT with practice that our 11th graders take. So you'll see that each content area is a little bit longer. There's some differences across different areas. So math goes from 40 minutes to 60 minutes. So when our juniors take this practice test in class, that's a really constrained time frame because our periods are 60 minutes and there's still some time lost in them logging in and getting to the test. So kind of keep that in mind as we look at the data. And then the bottom table just shows you the cut scores across the different tests. So the pre-ACT for 9th and 10th graders has lower cuts as opposed to what is expected of students by the time they reach 11th grade. So in displaying this data, the way that we look at it in many different ways, but one way that I chose to present this data to you today is to look at how students did from 9th grade to 10th grade. So what you're looking at here is our current sophomores, and we went back and we looked at, well, how did they perform in 9th grade in the fall 2022 pretest? And now how are they subsequently performing now a year later as sophomores on the fall 2023 pretest? A lot has happened between that fall assessment in 22 and the fall assessment in 23, but we wanted to see what we're kind of expecting is an increase in student performance. This 9th and 10th grade pre-ACT is the same length, it's the same test. It's actually a parallel test. It doesn't give the same questions, but they're parallel and very equivalent. So we would expect student growth from 9th to 10th grade. And so if you look at our English performance and you look at the percentage of students proficient, you see nice growth across all of the schools. So that orange bar is really our baseline for 10th graders, and this is where we're going to start with them and kind of work on improvement and reaching a higher level of proficiency by the time they take the practice test in January. This slide shows that same data, but just for our current juniors. So this is the cohort that is actually taking the ACT in the spring. Now, as you saw on those charts, that 10th grade test and the 11th grade test are different. The 11th grade test is longer and it has more stringent cut scores. So this decrease in performance is really attributed to the fact that even if they performed similarly to how they did in the fall of the prior year, the expectation for them in 11th grade is higher. So what we deem proficient is more rigorous. So you'll see performance across all of the different schools. And so this is our baseline data, and this is what the junior teachers are going to start with to try to then increase that proficiency level. If we break this data down by ethnicity, you'll see that for 9th to 10th grade, kind of like when you looked at all students, you'll see an increase in performance across all subgroups. So you'll see that students across each subgroup perform better in 10th grade than they did in 9th. You do see gaps in performance, so some subgroups are reaching higher levels of proficiency across both years, and some groups are reaching lower levels, but we see a steady growth across all subgroups, so that's a really positive finding. And then if you look at 10th to 11th grade, when we looked at overall slides, you saw a decrease in performance, and so you see that consistent across all of the subgroups. Some show greater levels of decrease than others, but pretty consistent across all subgroups. That Pacific Islander subgroup, I just wanted to point out, is a very small subgroup. It hovers around 12 to 15 students, depending on the test. So keep that in mind as we show that data. Anything below 10, we really don't report publicly, so that they're kind of right at the edge of that. So when we look at student performance in reading, you'll see a really nice growth from 9th grade in the fall to now their sophomore year across all schools. And you'll see that some schools have very high percentage of students that are proficient. Then that same slide just for 10th to 11th graders, you'll see that this looks different than what the English data look like. Reading is heavily focused in social studies. Those are the teachers that take on the reading component, but also all our non-core are really invested in working with students on the reading component. So there's really a cross-curricular approach to the reading standards, and I think that is displayed in this data. Students get a lot of practice and experience, so they are showing really nice growth, even as the test got longer and got harder and the cut scores got more intense. So you'll see nice growth across most schools. And when we look at that data by ethnicity, you'll see that from 9th to 10th grade, every subgroup has shown an improvement. And if we look at 10th to 11th grade, you'll also see that all subgroups show improvement from 10th to 11th grade, kind of mimicking what you saw for all students. Math is definitely an area of focus. Math is the lowest performing area across the state and really at a national level. So when we compare and we look at English and reading and then look at this kind of drop in math scores, that is something that we're really heavily kind of targeting and focusing this year. If you look at 9th to 10th grade performance, you do see an increase or at least a stagnant performance. So students haven't declined in their percent proficiency, and in some schools you see some growth. But overall, the level of proficiency is pretty low. And then when we look at 10th to 11th grade, you'll see slight improvement, or really you kind of see improvement across all schools. It's just that it's not a really significant growth, but it is growth. And then remember that the 11th grade test is a 60-minute test, and they really don't have the full 60 minutes to complete that test. If we look at that data by subgroup, you'll see that that Pacific Islander, that's not an infinity sign, that's 2 zeros. So there wasn't a student that was proficient, but that's, again, that small subgroup. And then you'll see some subgroups show improvement, and then there's a decrease in other subgroups. And then that same data for 10th to 11th grade. You'll see increases. In most of the subgroups, you see a slight increase from 10th grade moving into 11th grade. And then when we look at science, we see some significant gains from 9th grade to 10th grade in terms of how students were in terms of their proficiency level. So you'll see a nice kind of increase across all of the schools. You don't see that same trend happening in 10th to 11th grade. The 11th grade test significantly increases that cut score. Science actually has the highest scale score requirement for a student to be deemed proficient. There's a lot of heavy reading in this ACT practice test, so we do see a decrease in their performance, and I know that the science teachers will use this data as their baseline to then work with students and intervene so that the next time we take this practice test, we show growth. And then if you break that data down by ethnicity, you'll see that for 9th to 10th, since there was an overall increase across all subgroups, you'll see a nice increase across all subgroups in the percent proficient. And then you'll see a decrease from 10th to 11th grade across all subgroups, as we saw in all students as well. This slide shows performance of students in special education. So we did the same analysis. We looked at how did they do in 9th grade, and then how did they subsequently do in 10th grade from fall 22 to fall 23. So you'll see a nice increase in English and reading, a slight decline in math, and a little bit of an increase in science. And then when we look at comparison from 10th to 11th grade, you'll see a decrease in English and slight increase in reading. Math is low. This is that 60-minute test that is much longer. And then a decrease in science as well. And then this is data for our English language learners. So you'll see, I don't have a comparison of 9th to 10th because we had only 12 students in 9th grade. I just compared to 10th to 11th grade for you here, so you can see their performance across the 4 areas. This subgroup right here is just English language learners. Sometimes when we present that data, remember that we include the parent withdrawn students. This one just focuses on the EL subgroup because this is what we're going to use to work with the EL teachers who have students in the EL program to work with them on interventions and increasing this performance for the next test. So now that we have all that baseline data to start with, this is really just our check to see where are our students currently, and then how do we move forward from here. So if you look at that ACT plan that we have for Q2, really our focus is looking at data, developing interventions, working with students, and infusing that into our curriculum. We have added ACT practice into our scope and sequences to make that overlap between standards and ACT very seamless for students, so that it becomes part of what they do in class. So on October 9th, when teachers come back from fall break, they will have some time to analyze their data and look at student performance. So we created this worksheet that lists the focus standards for each of the content areas. And then they have some prompts there to guide their discussions. So they can look at their data at a PLC level and then identify which periods are struggling within their class load. But the second section is really where we want them to focus on, and we've created different videos and instructional materials to look at item level data and identify what are the types of items within your content area that students are struggling with, what are the most common misconceptions, and then how can we utilize that data to create action plans and intervene at a PLC level, but also at an individual teacher level. So the second part of that data worksheet is really next steps in developing intervention plans, both at a PLC level and then at an individual teacher level. We've also created these pivot tables for teachers that they can run in School City for their individual class periods. And what this screenshot shows you is student performance from 10th grade to 11th grade. So it lists the student name, but it shows you how the student performed at 10th grade and then how they subsequently performed in 11th grade. And I wanted you to kind of look at how different, even though that student 1 and 2, they look similar when we summarize data at a school or a PLC level. Both started at above benchmark and then did not meet benchmark, but the reasons behind why there was a drop in score might be extremely different. So with that student went from 53 to 46.7%. That's a really slight decrease in their performance. And so talking to that student to say, hey, you're only a couple of items away from passing this, is a very different conversation than with student 2, who went from 82, which is a very high score, to a 14.7. So this might be a conversation about motivational factors, or maybe there were some technology issues that we would need to look at. But it allows teachers to really have individualized conversations that deal with the individual problems that the students are having. So that's what teachers will be doing on October 9th. We also have all the support materials that we have created over the years to help teachers analyze data. So you'll see the core resources, the non-core resources, general resources that really deal with test-taking strategies, why is ACT important, tricks and tips for how to do well on the test. And then we have a lot of additional resources, which are generally practice materials for students. So that, I know I inundated you with lots of slides, so I'm sorry.
Well, thank you so much for the presentation. Member Hodge.
Thank you for the presentation. I just have one question, 2 parts to it. My first part is, when you look at you look at the data and you look at the fact that, 9th to 10th versus 10th to 11th, what are we going to do to make sure, because 10th and 11th, is to me the most important meat and potatoes of the school, because freshman year they're coming in and senior year they're leaving. So what are we going to do as a district to bring that 10th and that 11th, to up that 10th, to up that 11th up? Because I see in some parts that we drop a lot in different areas, and that's very concerning and alarming to me. What are we gonna do? And I look at our different subgroups, our ethnicity. The difference is, what are we gonna do towards our Hispanic, our Native American, and our African Americans who seem to be at the bottom in every topic, not just a few, every single topic. So those are things that I want to look at as a district. What can we do to bring the subgroups up? Like, we've talked about that as a board. What are we doing to help with that, even with our special needs, our EEL? We need to figure out what we're going to do, because this is every year they seem to be at the bottom. And I know, I'm just baffled to figure out how we bring that up, because that's concerning, that they're gonna graduate and they're gonna be at the bottom tier of everything as they graduate from high school. And that's just, I want that to be a question. I know it's not gonna be a question we can answer tonight, but I want that to be something that we start looking at, because we have to start looking at the subgroups, because some are way far, far beyond below than others.
Yeah, thank you. I absolutely agree, and we are looking at that data in great detail. We focus really, our plan for 9th and 10th grade ACT practice is different than what our plan is for 11th graders. So we are a lot more strategic and determined with 11th graders, because they are getting ready for that test in April. The 9th and 10th focus is really to build those foundational skills so that when they enter their junior year, they can really work on those skills. We have shown great progress last year when we looked at our data by subgroup, so we know that the plan that we have works. I think what the focus will be for this year is to continue to implement that plan, and then implement some of these new additions that we have added, where we have found some holes in what we have done last year. But I think when you look at our A through F letter grade data that I know we're going to present once that becomes available, you'll see the great gains that we have made across all subgroups.
Thank you, Member Hodge. Vice President Steele.
Thank you, Dr. Alexis. This was a sad and real presentation, and I appreciate all the energy and effort that you put into this. We do know there's a lot of work to be done, which is why we've created the goals that we have. Something I would actually like to see kind of separated again is taking special education and taking our A students, our level A, our level B, our level C, and then our private placement level D, so we can start seeing where those students in individual subgroups are being scored. So I would really appreciate that.
Yeah, we're actually working on that report in our data dashboard, because we have gotten requests for that, so we will have that for you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Vice President Steele. Member Barrazo.
Appreciate the presentation and the work that it takes to get the data to be able to analyze it at this point. There's a lot of work. I'm looking at, one of the questions that just kind of comes to me is that what Board Member Hodge kind of mentioned, the 10th, 11th grade. We start with the pre-ACT on the 9th and 10th, and it seems that it's different enough by the time you get to 11th grade. I'm like, is it relative enough that we can compare the 10th grade test to the 11th grade test, considering the metrics are a little different, the questions are a little different? Because I feel like maybe we should look at the 11th grade, measure it at the beginning of the year against the end of the year as maybe more accurate, because I feel like that test, the questions and the time frame, I think that's what is, again, that sticking point personally from that 10th to 11th data, because you see it across the board no matter whether it's English or math. And so how relative do you think that 10th or 11th is? There work that when you look at to analyze it?
Yeah, the 9th and 10th test is designed to be predictive and prepare students for the ACT, but they are different tests. So I think when you look at those charts, that's why I kind of pointed out and wanted you to look at the timing and the cut scores. They are different. So it's not a parallel one-to-one comparison, but the 9th and 10th is supposed to prepare students as they move forward into 11th grade. It's just that we have increased significantly the cut of what our expectations are the 9th, 10th expectations are much lower than the expectations in 11th grade. Next time we have another data point, when we have the winter test, then I will compare the fall to winter within the same test, and I think that would make more sense. What we could have done is compared last year's cohort to this year's cohort, but those are different kids, and so I wanted you to see the growth within an individual student.
I appreciate that, because that's kind of what I was like thinking is like, how comparable are they, when we look at that. But the other question, more or less, math is, notoriously the difficult area, and there's been studies that show, like, if you can get students to relate and excel in math and science, there's increases across, other disciplines. But I'm just wondering, when we look at 9th and we see that growth, it's slight growth, but it's from 9th to 10th, and you see that little bit of growth. And one of the questions I had pertaining to that is, how relative, again, in this case, do you look at the 9th grade data and say, I guess ultimately, and I'll probably step on some toes in the K-8 department, but I look at it as when you get to the high school level, there's a lot more in terms of the standards and, things you have to meet, because there's diplomas, there's accreditations, there's, the state requires so much in order to obtain that diploma. But my just kind of assumption is that maybe that's not so stringent in the K-8, that those deficits get compounded because you can pass a student further along and create that deficit, even having more of an impact on that deficit. So by the time they get to the 9th grade level and we're testing them, I'm wondering how deficient some of those students are from the time that they hand us over, or their student over to the high school level. And is there an opportunity to measure at least that growth and say, well, they started here and we got them here by the end of the 9th grade level, so we can see and say, okay, the numbers are low, but nonetheless, we took them from a 6th grade math level to now a 9th grade by the end of the year. That is success, but it can get distorted or kind of skewed or hidden based off of the way what we're looking at the numbers. So is there a way that we can look at that growth, or at least that handoff? That might be difficult, on where they started before taking the ACT in the 9th grade, and then measuring it on that level. Because I also do notice that they take the test this year in September, so it's early enough to where we haven't really kind of gone in front of a lot of the issues. It's very raw. So what are your thoughts on that?
We could look at how they grew in terms of proficiency. I think the difficulty is that in 8th grade, they take the ASA test, which is kind of similar to what AZ Merit used to be at a high school level, very different from the ACT that we're using at a high school level. So we don't really have comparable assessments. When you asked me, is the 9th, 10th different than 11th? And I said, yes, well, the AA is completely different than the ACT. So we could look at general proficiency, but we really can't track growth. The way that the state tracks growth is going to help us starting from this year, where they look at growth in terms of a normative measure. So they look at how did students perform in 8th grade and who are your similar cohort, who are your peers in terms of achievement, and then how much did you all grow the next time we tested you. And so if you grew with your group or outgrew your group, then you're labeled as high growth, and if you underperformed your group, you're low growth. So that's one way to get away from the differences across tests, and so we do look at that data. We just had a break in assessments for a couple of years due to COVID, and so we've kind of lost that ability to track.
That's true, yeah. So we kind of normalize it based off of maybe categorizing how did this group do, and then based off of the normalized data, we can then say, well, you did better than the average of that. Okay, because yeah, just looking at the ACT, I know that, it's kind of a baseline. We start every student saying, this is a test, you take it, and this is what you scored, but we always know that no student is, starting at the same starting point. And so I think that for me, at least, that feels a little more intuitive, that maybe that growth aspect, because I do also know at Marcos Denise, I've talked to some teachers, and they're, they'll be frustrated, when the scores for the schools come out. And they'll say, well, we got this grade, but what they don't know is we've taken a student reading level at this level, and we've brought them up to the next grade level that they're going into. So while maybe you don't get the grade that the school deserves in a sense, but that growth just showed we took a struggling student and we excelled them. So it's frustrating, and so, yeah, I'm just curious on how that ninth grade data looks at, with the ACT, and so I appreciate that information. Thank you.
Thank you, Member Barraza. Member Hodge?
Promise is two quick questions for Dr. Wilson. My first question is, when we talk about we doing the summer programs between the 8th grade to 9th grade year, can we figure out a way to kind of encompass our ACT testing in there, just so we can start getting that jump on it before they even come to high school? And that's something that Tempe Union works with the elementary schools with. I'm just wondering if we can encompass some of that in our tests and some of our curriculum when they doing that bridge over with Tempe L. And that's not a question you have to answer right now. And the second question is, when she kept talking about time, is there any way we can do a different calendar time when they have to take the test, so they get the full 60 minutes instead of having to worry be cut in between that time? Because she kept saying, remember, the time is a longer and they only have 60 minutes in the class. Is it a way that when we know that testing, they have a calendar time that we can change the time so they can actually have the amount of time that they need in that classroom to make sure they get the full time for the test, even if they have to prepare or whatever for it first, so like an extra 5 minutes or something, or extra 10 minutes, so they have the full 60 minutes for that test when they were talking about, because you kept saying it's the time that's is longer and they're getting cut off. I want to make sure they get their full time.
Do you want to answer that, or would you like for me to, Dr. Lexke?
Well, I was just going to say, and you might want to say something different. I was going to say that in January, when we do the practice test, remember that this is our baseline data, and so we're trying to see, like, what are they able to do and how much do they know. In January, when they take the second practice test, then they do have, we follow the exact schedule of the ACT, and so they will get the full 60 minutes.
Perfect. Thank you, Member Hodge. Two quick things for me, just for the sake of time. First, I think it really stood out when we look at the proficiency levels for reading. You mentioned the non-core teachers and the social studies teachers kind of having this cross curricular approach to reading, and that shows in the scores. So later on down the road, as we continue to have these conversations, as we're monitoring those first three board goals around these proficiency levels, I'd love to kind of hear what some of those strategies and interventions are that maybe we could scale over to some of the different disciplines that we talk about. Of course, we look at math. We've talked about this before. We've had this conversation before, and I'm curious if we'd be able to break that down a little bit more, even from the class level, to say where particularly in this, in the math continuum are students struggling? Is it concentrated in the algebra 1? Is it concentrated in geometry? Where are students really struggling? Because then can pinpoint, is this a conversation that we need to really continue with Tempe L and saying, hey, how is the curriculum specifically in the math section aligning and preparing our students when they enter our Tempe Union schools? And so I think it'd be interesting to kind of look at some of that data to kind of pinpoint really where, students are struggling in that section to help some of the interventions, or if that's something that's already being done.
Yeah, we actually already do that. So if you remember that, actually, I'm not projecting anymore, but that worksheet has the key focus standards, and we have pulled those out of which are the areas at a district level, but also at a school level that students are struggling with. And then the item level analysis is supposed to help teachers identify not only the standard, but the type of question that students tend to miss most often.
Perfect. I appreciate it. All right, board members, any other questions or comments on this item? All right, thank you so much. Next, we'll move to item H2, curriculum adoption for the 2024-2025 school year. So board members, this was the addition of the Yaki 2 language course to give students the 2-year language requirement for college admission. Is there any comments or questions on this item? I will just briefly, I know Member James is not here, but she was a big advocate for this, and so I want to thank her for her advocacy on this, and thank you, Dr. Wilson, for bringing this forward. All right, with that, I will make a motion to approve item H2. Do I have a second?
I second.
Thank you, Member Hodge. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Motion passes 4-0. Next, we move to business services, item I1, the 2022-2023 annual financial report. Take it away.
Can't see anything. So, good evening, ladies and gentlemen, President Montero, Vice President Steele, members of the governing board, Dr. Wilson, executive team, and distinguished community. So it is official. The 22-23 school year is finally finished when it comes to accounting. So tonight, I have a brief presentation for you to kind of highlight some of the pieces of information from the annual financial report. You'll notice that you have 6 financial reports, but I'm only going to address one of them as opposed to every single one of them. But the data in the one is the same as it reflective in all the others. Okay, so last school year, the district spent a little over $180.3 million. That was made up of several different categories. So first, our first category was our maintenance and operation. In that particular fund, we spent a little over $105.7 million. That fund, the M&O, is the majority of our overall budget at 58.6%. Our next category was unrestricted capital outlay at $13.5 million, or 4%. This category consists of a district additional assistance, or DAA, our capital override as well. And some of the items that would be purchased through these funds would be equipment, instructional aids, technology, vehicles, and building improvements. Our next category is debt service. In this category, we spent a little over $7.2 million, or 7.7%. So this particular fund, the revenue that comes into this fund is from taxes, and the money is used to pay our principal and bond interest, so basically bond payments and fees. Our next category is classroom site fund. So we spent a little over $11 million in this category, or 7.5%. These funds are used for teacher compensation and dropout prevention. Our next category is, you'll notice, is other funds. And in both of the tables, I have 2 categories of other funds, and I'll kind of explain or break those down. So in our first other funds, it was a little over $28.8 million, or 16%. In this category, it included items such as CTE, food service, student activities, and bond funding. You'll notice that the table below is a breakdown of all of those different other funds. At the bottom, there's also another category called Other. In that category, we spent a little over $8.8 million, and in that category, it included instructional improvement. So this is money that comes from Indian gaming revenue, which is received twice a year, both in January and in June. And the majority of these funds are also used for teacher salaries and benefits. This category also included funding from gifts and donations, building renewal, so SFB funding, indirect costs, civic center rentals, and insurance proceeds, just to name a few items. Next, we're going to break down or look a little deeper, specifically with the maintenance and operation budget, and we'll start by program category. So first, we have our regular education. In this category, we spent a little over $75.9 million, or 71.8%. Also, next, we have our special education at $24.5 million, or 23.2%. The two added together makes up 95% of our M&O budget expenditures for last year. Next category is pupil transportation at a little over $5 million at 4.8%, and then our dropout prevention a little over $200,000. And just to mention, our dropout prevention rate for last year was 3%. Next, we'll break down those categories by object. So we'll start with our salaries. So our salaries were a little over $66.4 million, or 62.9%. Our benefits were a little over $20 million, or 19.7%. Again, those two added together reflect 82.6% of all of the expenditures for last year from M&O. Our next category is purchase services. So in this particular category, we spent a little over 12.2 million, or 11.6%. Items such, to give you an example of what would be included in purchase services, you have employee training, audit, legal, technical services, repair, maintenance, rental of equipment, travel, postage, advertising, tuition to private schools, student transportation, communication. So it's a very broad area. Our next category looks at supplies. At supplies, we had a little over 5.6 million, or 5.6%. Supplies is not just general supplies. It also includes utilities, fuel, food, books, and instructional aids. And our last category is a little over 500,000, is other, another other category. We have several of those. In this particular category, items within this category would be technology, network district fees, district-wide, professional memberships, or license fees for software, just to give you an idea. So now we'll break down the M&O expenditures by function. So we'll start with instruction, because as we know, that is our largest area. So instruction was a little over 51.6%, or 48.8%. And our instructional support, a little over 13.3, or 12.6%. If you add the two together, it represents 61.4% of our budget. Our next category is administration at 14.5, or 13.7%. And I kind of just want to give you an idea, because this is another one of those broad categories that has a lot of stuff in it. So administration consists of general administration, school administration, as well as all of our central services. So that includes areas like business services, purchasing, warehouse, HR, payroll, planning, research and development, public information, and IT. So it's a catch-all for everything, basically. Our maintenance and operations is our next category at 17.6 million, or 16.7%. And that area includes operation, maintenance, ground, security, and safety. And then we have our non-instructional area, a little over 8.1%, or 7.7%. And this particular area includes transportation, food services, community school, and bookstore operations. Okay, so every year, the Auditor General's Office prepares a classroom spending report for all school districts around the state of Arizona. This report comes out or is prepared and released around the end of February or March timeframe. So as of right now, since we barely closed the 23 school year, the report for 23 is not available until February or March of 24. What I have for you tonight, though, is a picture of representation of the classroom spending report for FY22. So you'll notice in FY22, our classroom spending percentage was 68.4%. That area includes instruction at 52.5, student support at 8.8, and instructional support at 7.1. It also represents non-classroom spending of 31.6. In those areas, as you can see, it includes administration, plant operations, food service, and transportation. So every year, the district likes to prepare a projected classroom spending report. Since, as I mentioned, the report will not be available until February or March, we'd like to give the district, the governing board, the community an idea of what we anticipate the report will look like once the Auditor General releases their version. In this particular area, you'll notice our classroom spending was around 67%. It includes, again, instruction, instructional support, and student support. We also have for non-classroom spending, we estimate around 33%. Again, it includes administration, plant operations, food service, and transportation. The next slide is going to be fun. Not really. Okay, so in this particular category, what we are doing is we're comparing our projected classroom spending report against the FY22 classroom spending report that I just have shown both of them. So you'll notice that classroom spending, I mentioned, was 67%, and our non-classroom spending was at 33%. So you'll notice there was a decrease in 1.4, and then there was an increase of 1.4 in the other particular category. Basically, really what I wanted to mention here is just that though you'll notice an increase and a decrease in each area, the increases to non-instructional area was greater than the increase to instruction, which basically is resulting in the changes. So it wasn't like a diversion or diverting funding from classroom spending to non-classroom spending. It's just the increases were higher in that other area. Does that make sense? So the next one, okay, so the state and the Auditor General's office has decided that they are going to do an inquiry. So they've added a tab to the annual financial report. On this tab, they are asking all of the school districts to please explain your fund balance reserve. What is your process? Do you have an official policy? And how do you go about it? So yes, the district administration does have a target fund balance reserve specifically for M&O. In this particular category, we're targeting 3 different areas. First, we'll start with to maintain a minimum fund balance reserve equal to the amount of the M&O override, which is currently 15%, which equates to, in the 24 budget, a little over $13.9 million. Our second area is to maintain a minimum fund reserve equal to the amount of the DAA capital override, which is currently $8.7 million. In both of these categories, the reason why we are building these reserves, because as you'll notice, it says to allow for budget transition, in budget transition should either of these overrides no longer be renewed. Our third area is to maintain at least a 15% of the M&O budget limit amount in reserves to be able to adjust for declining enrollment without impacting the current year's expenditures. So the district has had a demographer study done, and in this report, it did project that the district enrollment would decrease by 10% over the next 10 years. However, I can tell you we're declining much faster. So when we built the budget for FY24, we started out with a 1% decrease from our FY23. However, unfortunately, we're currently around 3.4% down, as opposed to the 1. A couple things that I just wanted to mention about these fund reserves is that the district does not currently charge a lot of fees to our students compared to other districts. And this reserve helps us to be able to maintain that decision, to give you an idea. So what is the current target for the M&O fund balance reserve amount? It's a little over $42.3 million. And what is the current actual M&O fund reserve amount? A little over $46.3 million. So a couple of things that I wanted to mention and to think about is think about this reserve as like a savings account similar to your own. In those, the purpose of those funding, sorry, I lost my place. So technically, you can utilize your savings account for one-time costs, basically. They just can really be ongoing costs because unfortunately, once it's gone, it's gone. However, a couple of bonus points or positive things about having a higher reserve. We recently, in November of 22, the district received approval for a bond authorization up to $100 million. We had our first bond sale this past school year at $45.4 million. This higher reserve, though, when you're looking at being reviewed, think about it like a credit score. So the higher your credit score, the better your interest rate. So the district, in April of last year, received basically our credit score was increased to a AAA rating, which is the highest rating that you can get. We received that from both Moody's and Fitch, which are rating bond companies. A couple of things that, as I mentioned, you get a higher credit score, better interest rate. the better the savings to our taxpayer and our community. This reserve, though, I would like to mention, is it's been a process. So it's not something that we started overnight. It's something that we have been planning and building over time. And the only way we've been able to do this is through strong financial management and good fiscal controls. Any questions?
Thank you so much for the presentation. Board members, questions or comments? Member Barraza?
Yes, just a couple of brief things. First off, I think it's wonderful we got the AAA rating. It just shows that Tempe Union's a great investment, for the bonds, and I appreciate the hard work to get us there. And I'm looking at actually the AFR for 23, the actual just data numbers, and looking at it at the ADM, and we see about 200,000 ADM from 12,600,000 to 12 million, almost 12.4. Is that in line with the demographer's report? Again, I'm looking at the Excel sheet of the actual funding when we're looking at the beginning fund balance and the revenues and ending fund balance, the actual data. So I was just curious about that ADM of attending from 2022 to 2023. Is that kind of what we expected? I know you kind of mentioned that. Okay, I appreciate that. The other, just quick question, just with the food service aspect, it looks like we ended our end funding balance with 2.1 million, and we allocated 4.1 for the let me look right here, 5.6, and the actual expenditures was 4.1. Do we generally have that big of a gap when we're trying to estimate stuff like food service? Do we have that much of a cushion, essentially?
At times, it could be, because as we know, inflation cost, so the price of fuel, price of food has drastically gone up. Plus, the district has received additional funding from the USDA to help offset some of our food costs. So that's one reason why we've been able to have an additional reserve in that particular account to help offset some of those expenses.
Okay, I appreciate that. And so does that mean the ending fund balance of 2.1 carries over to the following year, or? Okay.
It does.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you, Member Barraza. Members, any other questions or comments? All right.
All of those funds roll over. We don't lose any of them, unless it's at the end of a grant. But
Yeah, similar question onto that. I know when we look at the projected spending by the operation area with the 1.4% increase in non-classroom spending with the dip in classroom spending, is most of that contributed to the cost, the rise of cost for some of these, what in some of these different areas, specifically food service, transportation, et cetera, or are there other reasons for that increase?
there are, that's a good portion, but there are some additional. So last school year, some additional positions were increased or added, some additional FTEs. We provided FTEs, the behavior intervention specialists that the district has, both 3 in special education and 6 in regular education. Both of those categories are being funded by ESSER, and those are student support categories. We added a school counselor, we added an attendance student data and admin, we added an admin assistant to the director of safety, a coordinator for Tempe Online. We also added a arts and performing arts coordinator position, 3 additional dean students, 2 roving security officers, and 1 surveillance officer. So quite a few additional FTEs in 23 that we did not have in 22.
Perfect. I appreciate it. That's all we have. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Perfect. And this does need to be, yeah, we do have action on this. Okay, so then I will move to approve item I1. Do I have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Member Hodge. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Motion passes 4-0. Next, we move to item I2, approval of contract expenditure for architect engineering and project management services for bond projects. Board members, questions or comments on this item? Member Barraza.
Just really quick, I want to thank Sean McDonald, and please thank Mike Thornby for getting a lot of these projects underway and for the preventative maintenance that we're doing under our on all of our campuses. I really, really appreciate it. It's very important, especially, when we're trying to be good stewards of our taxpayer dollars and making sure that they're going to make sure there's longevity and our resources are taken care of. I just also want to thank the fact that I'm looking at the ADM group and they're looking at the schematics. We're investing in the schematics for Desert Vista, Marcos Nice, and Mountain Point for their science labs. Really appreciate that. I'm looking forward to having more discussions with you on some of these projects. So we'll sit together, but I just wanted to say, that I think these are great investments from looking at our science labs to renovating a lot of our different spaces to make it more usable for not only our students, but our community members, after school hours. So thank you. That's all.
Thank you, Member Barraza. All right, hearing no more discussion, I will move approval of item I2. Do I have a second?
I second.
Thank you, Member Barraza. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Motion passes 4-0. Next, we move to information items. Item J1, request for future agenda items. Board members, are there any requests? All right, hearing none, we do not have a committee or conference update, so we will skip item J2.
Yeah, we do. I have to say one thing about CUBE.
Oh, go ahead.
Yes. I just wanted to say, thank you for the district for sending me to CUBE. CUBE is very interesting because it's an urban school board conference, and it really gets into the highlights of what we were just talking about with our subgroups and some of the information that we got of what they're doing in different districts. I'm going to sit down with Dr. Wilson and talk about that with her, but they gave us some great insights to how to help with those subgroups in urban areas, because more of the urban areas have more of those subgroups in them, and I have some information and pamphlets for her, but that's what the highlight of it was. Thank you.
Thank you, Member Hodge. All right, next we'll move to communications, item K1 from governing board members. Let's just go down the line.
Oh, come on, let's go the other.
Member Hodge.
I just want to thank everybody for a fall break. I don't remember what I did, what I've seen last. I've been to several football games, several sporting events, and I represented just at meeting the president, because the president was here and we talked about Tempe Union. So I just want to say he was excited to hear about our school district and that we're in the running for him to come to our school district. So very important that we may be getting him coming out here.
Thank you, Member Hodge. Member Barraza.
Just wanted to say thank you again to Sean McDonald and Stacia Wilson. I appreciate taking the time to, along with Vice President Steele, we went and toured the construction projects at Corona, the track and field, and learned more about what is going into the track and field to make sure that we have those renovated and usable for the next 30 years. There's a lot of work going on, and it's wonderful that we're taking care of them across all our campuses. So I appreciate, you showing us a little bit on that side of, how things get kind of rolling in terms of getting our new track and fields. And I do believe you had mentioned, Sean, that we have the oldest track and field, tracks in the state, correct? Yeah, so it's well needed and well appreciated, and I know the students are going to very much appreciate using them. So thank you.
Thank you, Member Barraza. Vice President Steele.
Thank you, President Montero. I hope everyone's having a good fall break. It's been a long couple of weeks and really busy, but I was grateful for the opportunity to go with Board Member Barraza, Acting Superintendent Wilson, and Assistant Superintendent Sean McDonald. It's always fun to learn with Sean McDonald. This does not. Is that better? Okay, sorry about that. Over the last couple of weeks, I did get to experience, what am I doing wrong? Experience 2 of our badminton activities with our unified sports. And then I have gone to a football game that I had said at our last meeting that I was going to. So I did get to go to the Corona Marcos game. I think that's all I've really had an opportunity to do. I am excited because I'm going to go to a wedding for a Corona graduate this weekend. So I'm looking forward to that. And I'm looking forward to seeing everybody come back after a nice long 2-week break. I'm going to do it without you even telling me. Look at that. I have our gifts and donations, and it's a long list tonight, so bear with me. We have $14,000 donated to Desert Vista High School from the Desert Vista Band Boosters. $11,519 to Corona del Sol from the Corona Men's Soccer Booster Club, $2,500 to McClintock High School from Andrew Gridge in memory of Reed Cox, $1,814 to Desert Vista High School from the Desert Vista Golf Boosters. I have this is going to be from Banner Sports Medicine for Corona del Sol, Desert Vista High School, Marcos de Niza High School, and McClintock High School, Mountain Point High School, and Tempe High School, all for a total of $1,645. We have $355.88 to Mountain Point from the ASB Sports acquisition, $270.30 to Desert Vista High School from the American Online Giving Foundation, $53.48 to Corona del Sol from Melissa IP, $48 to Corona del Sol from Brett Nunn, $20 to Desert Vista High School from Tricia Rothery, and $10 to Marcos de Niza, oh, no, there's two more, from the Black Bod Giving Fund. And the final one is Arizona Furnishings to the Innovation Center, donated an office desk estimated at a value of $500. And that'll complete my report.
Thank you, Vice
Thank you.
President Steele. I do not have too much. I was able to attend a couple of different activities and football games, did go to the Corona and Marcos game, which was a fun time. But want to wish everyone a happy fall break and successful in second quarter coming up, and want to thank everyone for all the hard work that they are doing. That is all that I have. Dr. Wilson, is there anything from you or the executive team? All right. Well, then, our next regular meeting is October 18th, 2023. With that, I will make a motion to adjourn tonight's meeting. Do I have a second?
A second.
Thank you, Member Hodge. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Motion passes 4-0. We are adjourned.